This course is broken down into multiple sections. We'll first learn how to navigate around the interface, and in the next section we'll begin setting up our project. Next, we will be adding content into our artboards, and then we'll complete the design using the skills that we've learned in previous sections. After the design is complete, we'll move on to prototyping and sharing our design, and I'll end off with some resources that you can use to continue learning and designing with Figma. This course is designed to walk you through designing a recipe app from scratch, but if you ever want to jump into future videos in the course, there are exercise files included to start wherever you'd like. As we go through the videos in this course, I may introduce certain files that we want to start out with, and you can download these exercise files in Udemy. If you're watching this in Udemy, you can click this menu button to open up the course sections, and this is where you will download the exercise files to follow along. This is what the exercise files folder looks like, and you can see to the very left we have an assets folder. If we double click inside of here, this is where we're going to see all of our images, some text files, and these are things that we're going to import into our projects. But if you're following along in specific chapters, I may introduce a new file at the beginning of the video in the bottom left corner. And if you follow that path, you can click inside of the folder, and this is where the Figma files are going to live if you want to start off with the same file I'm using in the video. Now, once we begin designing the recipe app, you will be able to start your own file and follow along with me without having to download each file for each video. If you do skip some videos, however, I recommend that you start with the latest file inside of one of these folders as you work through the design with me in the video. In this section, I'm going to teach you how to navigate around the interface. We won't be diving into our recipe app project just yet, but learning these tools in a brief overview to help you become familiar by the time we jump into the next section and begin our project. If you're already somewhat familiar with Figma's interface, feel free to move on to the next section to begin your design. If you're wondering if Figma is right for you, it's good to understand what Figma is. Figma is an online design tool that lets you design, prototype, and gather feedback all in one place. Because your designs are in the cloud, you never have to upload, download, or worry about versions. With Figma, you can create design teams and work together with dozens of people at the same time. Developers can join and inspect and export or copy code for product development. Your marketing team can jump in and edit copy and images. And you can quickly communicate design ideas by sharing interactive prototypes with a link. Figma is an awesome tool for large design teams that want to work closely together without any friction, and is currently the only design tool with this amount of collaborative power. Think of Google Docs for designers. If this feels like the right tool for you, join me in future videos as I explain these features in more detail. To get started using Figma, you'll want to go to figma.com, and then you can click sign up here over to the right, and just enter in your email address and a password that you want to use. And once you do this, it'll ask you for your name and then what kind of work you do. And then you can click create account here. Now, Figma works on almost any modern browser, but it works best in the Chrome browser. So if you're going to use Figma in a browser, I highly recommend using Chrome. And in a later video, I'll show you how to use their desktop app, which has a little bit more functionality. Now that we're signed up for Figma, we can see the start screen here, and this is where we get access to all of our files. So we have 3 sample files that Figma has given us, and we can always double click into there to open those files. But if you want more options with those files, you just click on this More menu here, and we have other options like sharing, duplicating, renaming, things like that. Now we have different ways of browsing our files. Over here on the left, we can browse by most recent, the drafts or deleted files. And we can also create new teams. So we can share files inside of teams for different collaborators. And this is where you're going to create new teams. I'll talk more about this in a future video, but this is where you're going to be able to find your teams. Also, if you want to change any account settings, you can click on this down arrow here, and we can change our account settings, and we can also get the desktop app. And I'm going to show you how to do that in a future video as well. Now, if you don't want to start off with a Figma file, we can actually import files here. So we can import Figma, sketch files, images, different things like that if we want to start off with a different document. Now, over here to the right is the notifications icon, and we're not going to see any notifications yet, but as people start to collaborate with you and they start to comment and things like that, you're going to find those notifications here. Lastly, if you have any questions about Figma, there's this help and resources icon here where you can get access to some video tutorials, the community forum, and things like that. Let's talk about what you can find inside the Figma menu bar. To the right, I have Figma open in a web browser, and to the left, I have Figma open inside of the Figma desktop app. And there are many benefits to running this inside of the app, and that starts with the menu screen. And in both of these windows, I'm going to open up a new file. And if you don't have any existing files, you can just click on New File. It doesn't matter what file you open up. I'm just going to show you the menu bar. So I'm going to double click on both of these to open them up. And first off with the menu bar, as you can see, we have File, Edit, View, History, Bookmarks, People, Window, Help. And this is the Chrome browser. But if I click on Figma, now you have things that are associated within Figma. Object, vector, text. And these tools come in really handy when you're designing with Figma. You can find these same menu options inside of the Chrome browser if you click in Chrome, click on this hamburger menu, and you have some of these same things. I'm going to discuss the menu items inside the Figma app, but if you are using Chrome or another web browser, you can follow along in this hamburger menu. Going from left to right here, we have File, and this is where you can start new projects or files. You can close and open tabs, and you can also save your projects as a .fig. Now, when you're usually editing projects, you don't have to save as you're editing because everything's live and on the browser. But if you want to save an offline instance to store or archive, you can click on the Save as Fig, or you can export different files in your project here. Within the Edit menu, we have the typical undo, redo, cut, copy, and paste. And we also have Paste in Place. And then some great tools that we have are Pick Color. So if there's already a color that you like inside of your project, you can choose this Pick Color and click anywhere within this canvas to choose that color. And any objects that you have selected will adopt that color. You can also set default styles for shapes that you're creating. So when I click on this rectangle tool and I just draw a rectangle here, the default style is this gray color. If I choose to have this black and I have a purple stroke, for example, and I choose the weight of the stroke to be 10 pixels, now I can click on this object, I can go to Edit and set default style, and now when I click on this rectangle again and draw a new rectangle, it's always going to adopt that same style that I set. Now there's also copy style and paste style. So again, if I draw these two rectangles here, I can set a style here of, let's change this back to white. And instead of changing this one back to white, I can click here, copy this style, and then click onto this object and paste the style here, and it'll adopt the same styles that I have set. You can also choose to select all, and that'll select everything within the canvas, which are just these two objects right now. You can select none, or if I select this guy and go into Edit and select Inverse, this will select everything besides what I already have selected, which is this object here. Now there are also some great selection filters that are very powerful. So to illustrate this, I'm going to copy these two objects here, and I'm going to hold down Option and drag to duplicate these. And with these two objects, I'm going to change the fill. Let's change it to black again. And now with these objects, if I click one of these and go into Edit, I can select everything that has the same style. So if I click on this, it's going to select only these two objects. Or I can choose to select all just with the same fill. And that's also, again, going to be these two objects. And so you can see kind of what this is doing. You can select every element within your project that has the same text, and then you can quickly change that text throughout your project. Even if it's through 100 artboards or frames, you can change that text within seconds. These may sound like very simple options, but allows for powerful editing techniques. And lastly, if you want to add any emojis or symbols into your design, you can find those here. Now to show you some things inside of the View menu, first I have to create a frame, and we'll talk more about this later, but I just want to create one real quick to illustrate how the View menu works. Show Pixel Grid works if you enable this. It will show you the pixels themselves. If I zoom in holding down Command, you can see this little grid showing each individual pixel. So that comes in handy when you're trying to place your design on pixels. You can also show layout grids. So it's enabled right now, but we don't have a layout grid. So I'm going to just click plus, and you can see that that shows the grid, or you can hide this. There are other view options like show mask outlines. If you're masking some objects together, you can kind of show where those outline or bounding boxes are. You can show the rulers here, hide and show. You can show different panels. So you can toggle the layers panel on and off here. And you can toggle the entire user interface to show or hide. So everything's hidden in kind of a full screen view here. And then if you want to show just the outlines of your design, you can click on this and it hides everything else, the styling, and just shows you where the outlines are for your project. And now the pixel preview option, if you click on that, I'm going to zoom in to illustrate this. You can kind of see that everything looks sharp right here because it's vector. But if I rotate this, for example, you can see that it starts to get blurry, and that's because it's showing us a preview of what it will look like if this vector was displayed on these pixels on a device. You can also choose to show a transparency checkerboard, and pretty much what this does is if there's anything transparent inside of this frame or canvas, it'll create a checkerboard showing you that it's see-through. When you export it, it's going to be transparent. In this section, we have a few zoom controls, and next we can find the next artboard and it'll switch over to the right, or previous artboard will switch to the artboard over to the left. So if I click on this frame, for example, and I hold down Option to duplicate it, I have this frame selected. I can go into View and I can say I want to find the previous artboard, and it's going to jump to this one on the left. Next, we can just enter full screen, and it'll just zoom everything up to be front and center. And now we have the Object menu. So let's zoom out here so we can see both of these artboards. I can click on Object, and this is where you can group different selections or ungroup. You can frame a selection. So if I click on these two objects and choose Frame Selection, it will wrap your objects around a frame, and this is a little bit different than grouping, and I'll show you why in a future video. Now we have a few component options, and the great thing about components is that it allows you to reuse a symbol or a design throughout your entire project and to make quick changes very easily. I'm going to cover this in a lot more detail in a future video, but these options here will allow you to create a component, so it converts this frame into a component, as you can see here. And then here you can go to Master Component. Now because we only have one master component here, if I copy this 500 times, let's say, I can select one of these copies. I can jump in here and select Go to Master Component, and it'll just jump to that master component so I can make those quick changes. Also, if I click on one of the child components and if I change the color or the stroke to be different than that master component, I can always click on this Reset Instance, and it'll reset the style to what the master component is. Next, let's say you have a master component and a few child components. And one of the child components, you want to be able to edit the size and the stroke and everything, and you don't want it to be affected by the master component. You can always detach this and convert it back into a frame where it's not a component by detaching this from the master component. Now I know this all probably sounds really confusing right now, but don't worry because I'm going to cover this in a future video. This is the power of Figma with components and collaborative editing. And it's going to take a dedicated video in itself to really explain how this works. Now you have some other object settings, so you can resize an object to fit inside of a frame, and you can toggle some object clipping to clip and be masked behind another object or not. These options here allow you to bring objects back and forth in the layering scheme. And to show you that here, I'm just going to click on this object. I'm going to hold down Option, and I'm going to drag this to create a copy. And you can obviously see this layer is on top of this layer here. And so if I want to move this around in the layers panel, I can click on Send to Back and it'll send this to the very back. Or I can go to Object and bring forward, bring forward, bring forward. It'll bring that forward 3 times in the layering scheme. You have some quick flip options if you want to flip this horizontally or vertically. Some quick rotation options. You can also flatten selection, so you can see the selection also shows that it's rotated here, but if I click on flatten selection, for example, it's going to flatten this, and now I have selection handles that are parallel to my artboard. So the difference here, if I click on this other object, you can see the width is 150 pixels, and now because the selection handle is contained perpendicular to my frame, it shows the width is 175 pixels. And there are some great reasons why you would want to do that for some particular objects, but just know that you have that ability here. So I've zoomed into my canvas here, and now if I click on this rectangle, you can click on any rectangle you want inside of here, as long as it has a stroke. And now if I go into Object, and I click on this outline stroke, what that does is converts this stroke into an outline. So if I click on this, you can see now that I have this outline. So now when I double click inside of here, you can see that this isn't a stroke, but it's actually a shape that I can now manipulate the inside of the shape and the outside of the shape. And this comes in handy sometimes because now when I resize this, you can see that this stroke that I've converted to an outline actually resizes with it. Let's scroll down here and select this object now. We're going to go back into Object, and we have some Boolean options. And I'm going to talk about this in another video too, but essentially you can join some selections together. So if you have 2 rectangles, if you click on Union, it'll match those to be one shape. or you can subtract one shape from another, like a cookie cutter method. And there are a few other options here to manipulate these multiple objects to combine into one shape. Now, if you ever want to duplicate any objects in place, you can hold down Command D, or you can click this duplicate selection in place, and then you can delete. Rasterize selection, if I click on this, this turns a vector shape into a rasterized graphic. So now this is an image. And if I resize this image, you can see the stroke gets skewed and things start to look a little bit weird here. And I can also click on this filled image option here and change things like the exposure, the contrast, saturation, and any other image editing options. Now clicking on this shape here, I'm going to go into Object, and you can show or hide a selection. So if I click on this to hide it, you can see that what that does is it toggles this little eyeball icon in the Layers panel to show and hide. You can also lock or unlock a selection so you don't accidentally change it. So this is hidden and locked, but I can show it and have it still be locked. So if I drag any rectangles, I'm never going to select that, and I won't be able to edit this accidentally. Again, this is just a toggle button to unlock and lock through here. And next you can select a few layers, then you can click on Hide Other Layers, and it'll hide everything that's not selected. Now if you ever want to quickly remove a fill or remove a stroke or swap the fill and stroke, these options are here. So now we have purple as the fill, black as the stroke, and we can just choose to remove the fill altogether. And now if I drag this over some of these objects, you can kind of see that the black is layered over it, but there's not any fill inside of there. Now to show you some items in the vector menu, what I'm going to do is just delete this frame here. I'm going to drag this over and just delete all the objects in here, so I just have one blank frame. And now this vector menu gives you some great options, so I'll show you kind of how these work. I'm going to click on the pen tool here, and I'll show you this tool in more detail a little bit later, but let's say we have some weird shape here, and I hit escape and say that I'm done. Well, what happens if we want to close this shape later? What I can do is double click on this object, and then I can choose this node here, and if I hold down Shift, I can select this node as well. And now if I jump into Vector, I can join the selection, which will interpret and just create a solid line in between the two open paths. But now if I click Command Z or Control Z on Windows, I can go back into Vector, and now I can say I want to smooth join the selection, which will interpret this and make the path really smooth. Another thing I may want to do is I can double click on this object again, and let's say I don't want this node inside of my selection here. So I can select this node again, go into Vector, and delete and heal a selection. And that will delete this node, but it'll also try to retain a similar shape that that node was taking care of. Sometimes when you use fewer nodes inside of your vector icons, your curves become smoother and it feels more organic. So these three tools can be really powerful. Now let's click Done here, and I'm going to just delete this shape. And just for illustration purposes, I'm going to add some text. We have a text box here. I'm going to increase the size here to 48 so we can see it. And now this text menu gives us some nice toggle, bold, italic, underline. We can convert text to its original case or uppercase or lowercase. Now this force read layout option isn't something that you're hardly ever going to use, if ever. This forces text objects in the selection to be laid out again if fonts you're using got updated. It just verifies that all the fonts are re-rendered to make sure they're using the latest version of that font. I've never used this yet, and I don't think you will either. Now to show you some features in the Arrange menu, I'm going to create a few objects here. So I'm just going to draw a few rectangles, and I'll hold down Option, just copy this. So we have 4 rectangles here. If we select all of these, we have some arrange options. We can round to pixels to make sure that the sizes of these aren't on subpixels, like 100.5 pixels. So this will round them to whole pixels in case that accident ever happens. And then you can arrange by aligning objects to the left. I'm going to click Command Z here. You can also align to top, and you can also pack things. So packing things horizontally fits each object side by side, packing them tightly so there's no margin between those objects. Again, you can pack these vertically, and that will do the same thing, making sure that they fit nice and snug against each other vertically. And then you have some distribute options. So you can distribute horizontally, you can distribute to the top vertically, or distribute bottom. So these settings just help you arrange objects evenly or align them evenly with each other. You can find a lot of those same options here as well. Now under window, we have some basic controls like minimize this window, zoom it to fill the entire screen. You can also select previous and next tabs. Here we only have one tab open, but let's say you have 3 files open. You can jump back and forth between them with these options. Or you can bring all Figma windows to the front. Inside help, I really love this search inside the Mac help. So if I want to find a certain feature in one of these menu options, I can just type it in here like outline, and I can find this outline stroke option actually lives under object and right here. So you can quickly find the settings that you're looking for inside the menu bar. There's also some help and tutorial files, and this is where you'll sign out of Figma, or you can toggle developer tools on and off. I've never used these. It's basically just an inspector mode, just like you'll see in Chrome. So you'll get to see some of the HTML that makes up these objects here. But again, I've never used this, and I don't think you will either. So that's just a brief introduction of the menu items here. We're going to go over a lot more of these in much more detail. I know I went over them really fast. It's just to get you basically introduced to some of these things so that you know where you can find different options if you want to go out and design on your own and just play with it. But again, some of these options warrant a much more detailed video to explain, so I'll do that in future videos. To show you the tools panel, I'm going to start off with a fresh new project. So to follow along, just start a new project and we can just work our way from there. The first thing I'm going to do in the tools menu is create a new frame. And this frame tool is used to create new artboards and also to frame certain sections like a navigation menu bar or an iPhone navigation footer. To start off, you can see here on the right we have different presets for frames that we want to create. So I can create an iPhone X frame, for example, here, and I can just click on that and it'll plop that directly in the canvas. Or if I click on this frame tool, I can drag and create a custom frame size at whatever size that I want. I'm going to delete this frame and let's just keep this iPhone X frame as we move along. Now to select any objects, you have this move tool, this move and select. So now I can click on the name of this frame and I can move it. Now I want to create a few shapes. So here's where you'll find your shapes. I can quickly draw some rectangles here. And if I click on this drop down arrow, I have more shape options. So here I can draw an ellipse and I can hold down shift to constrain this proportionately. And I'll just drag this around. And we have a few of these other ones, star tool, polygon, ellipse. I'll just place these ones for now. Now I can also scale these objects. If I have this circle, for example, I can click on this down arrow next to the move tool, and I can click on this scale tool, and I can just drag any one of these drag handles and scale this down or up as I see fit. Now those are great for simple shapes, and I'm going to just select both of these and drag them up a little bit. But I can also create custom shapes using this pen tool. For example, if I want to quickly create a shape of a heart, let's say, I can do that here. And I'll show you more how to use these controls to create your own shapes. I'm just drawing something quick to show you where these tools live and kind of how they work. And you can see here when we're inside the pen tool, we have other options here too. So we can use this paint bucket tool, for example, to click and paint a certain color inside of that stroke or that shape. And we can also use this bend tool to select certain nodes and bend the shape. If you want to design something more free form, like a signature, for example, you can use this down arrow and select the pencil tool. But before I do that, I'm just going to click done here because I don't want to create the same shape inside of this edited instance. So now I'm going to click on this down arrow and click on the pencil tool, and here's where I can create a quick signature, and I'm using a mouse so it's kind of messy, but you can see how free form that is. And now when you double click inside of here, you can still use these nodes to edit and clean up the paths here. Now you'll find a basic text tool, and this is where you can add different text. So you can add a navigation for example. And another thing you can do with the text tool is instead of clicking to add some text, you can click and drag to create a bounding box that your text is going to wrap and live inside of. Next, we have the comment tool, and this comment tool is really powerful because you can share your designs with anybody on the web. They don't have to install anything, and they can quickly jump in and start commenting on your designs here. So they can click on any area here and say, this circle needs some color, and as soon as they click post, I'll be notified of that, and I can have a conversation directly in here, and I can hover over this to refer back to this conversation. And now if I ever add some color, I can just click this resolve, and it'll archive that conversation, so I don't need to see it unless I pull up my archived conversation. So it's really nice. Now this center area right here is only showing the name of the file right now, which is untitled. This is where you can rename your file, and you can also jump into version history to see what's been going on through different versions. So if I click show version history, you can see what it looks like at 4:16 p.m. or the current version. And I haven't done much in here, so there's not many versions, but this is where you'll find 5, 10, or 15 different versions throughout the last 30 days. Now if I click back to editing here, I can click back on this drop down arrow. I can duplicate this file. I can delete this or jump back into my files or move this file to a certain project. So that's where you'll find the controls for your file. But watch what happens when I click on this circle. All of a sudden I have some contextual options that allow me to edit this circle specifically. So if you hover over this, this is the option for editing an object. So if I click inside of here, it'll show me the nodes, and here's where I can drag some of these nodes around and edit the object. I can click done here, or I can reset the instance. Now this is grayed out because this only applies to components, which we're going to talk about later. But let's say I create a component here, and this component's created. I'm going to just hold down Option and copy this master component, and that creates a child component. And again, I'm going to talk more about how this works in a later video. But now let's say I choose this color to be red, and I choose this color to be blue. Well, because this is a child component of this master component, I can click inside of here and I can say I want to reset this instance to match the master component. And that's what that does here. Now, if you want to mask any shapes with any other shapes or mask a shape with an image, you can do this here. And I'll show you how this works by adding an image real quick, and we'll mask that with this shape here. So we can go into the Shapes tool, click on Place Image, and now if you visit the Assets folder under the exercise files, you can click on any one of these images or just find an image on your computer to upload here. It doesn't matter which image. So I'm going to click Open, and now it's going to ask me where I want to place this. And watch this. If I hover over this circle, it'll place the image and mask it inside of here or this shape. But to maintain some masking control, what I'm going to do is just click outside of any of these and just click somewhere out of the canvas randomly. And now that we have this image in place, I can click on the image and resize this holding down Shift, and I can resize it to fit somewhat within this rectangle behind it. And now I'm going to hold down Z and drag a rectangle to zoom in here. And after I zoom in, I can select this rectangle, hold down Shift and select the image, and now I can click on this Use as Mask tool, and now this rectangle behind the image is purely a mask that's masking the image above this. So I can still click on this image layer. I can do some resizing within here and move it around to exactly where I want, and it'll always be masked within this rectangle. Now I want to show you the Boolean tool, and in order to do that, I'm just going to select everything that I have here and just hit delete. And here I'm just going to zoom in holding down the Z key, and I'll just drag a rectangle right here. And now I can add some different shapes here, like a rectangle and a circle. And now I'm going to change the color of this one so you can kind of see which one's on top of each other. Now using this Boolean tool, or this union selection, I can select two of these shapes here, and I can click union, and that creates one shape where I can change the color of this one shape. I can manipulate this as if it's one. But this Boolean effect creates icons that are non-destructive, so I can still double click inside of here and I can move this around and manipulate this shape to, for example, be wider and centered within this square. So you see you can create some great shapes using some simple squares and circles. Now if I right click and ungroup here, that will undo that change that I made, and I can still select both of these, and here I can choose to subtract the one that's in front from the one that's behind, and so now you can see that it kind of behaves as a cookie cutter. Holding down Command Z, I can undo this, and now I can intersect the selection, so anything that's intersected in between these two shapes it's going to keep. And excluding the selection retains the shape above here and the shape down here, and anything that's intersecting it kind of just subtracts that. Now you've seen so far that we have non-destructive editing where I can still move this around and it still retains the exclude feature. But what happens if I want to bake this in now and do some further editing? So this acts like one image. It is two different shapes. I can go in here after I've edited everything and combined my shapes. I can choose to flatten selection. And what that does now is it adds this as one single shape. So now when I double click inside of here, you can see that I can edit the nodes inside of here. And now I can't just grab this circle and move it like I was able to, but now I'm able to do some more advanced techniques to kind of tweak the shape that I want. The last tool I want to show you is the crop image. So again, I'm going to go into the shapes tool, click on place image, and I'll grab one of these shapes again. And once I place this here, I can place it like I have before, or I can click and drag a rectangle, and I can drag this to be the size that I want rather than just clicking it and have it place as the original size. So now I can click on this crop image here, and it gives me these nice crop marks where I can choose to compose this image in whatever kind of frame that I want. And once I hit return, that's now cropped. Now if I double click inside of here, I can do that same masking technique. And if I resize this, it kind of skews the image within this cropped area. Now those are all the object menus. And lastly, to the right, we can see more options in the tools panel. One of them is it's showing my name Caleb here because I'm actually logged in with two computers. So even though I'm using my same account, if I'm logged in twice, it'll show, hey, Caleb's here in another computer too. So if you have 3 or 4 or 5 people working on this project, you're going to see those 3, 4, or 5 icons here. And you can click on one of those icons to actually see that other user's mouse and follow where they're designing. Now, if you want to share this project with anybody else, you can click this share icon, and you can share this by just copying a link or even embedding a code inside of a blog for people to interact with your designs within a blog like WordPress. Now, we'll talk a little bit more about the present feature in a prototype video, but if I click on this, I get a nice preview of my design. And if I've prototyped this, I can click through to interact with my design. You can see that this present mode actually opens up in a new tab here, so I can still toggle back and edit a few things like move this over and jump back into the present mode and see that that changes live. Or I can just close it this way and jump back in at any time here. If I want to jump into my view settings, I can choose to toggle some pixel preview, pixel grid, layout grids. So these are a few quick view options that you'll get here in the view menu as well. And to the right, it shows you a few shortcuts to toggle these views on and off. Now, if you don't want to hold down Z to draw a rectangle to zoom in a certain area, or if you don't want to hold down Command to zoom in and out, you can choose some precise zoom controls by clicking on this arrow here and jumping to 0% or 50%. And there's also some shortcuts here that you can use, like the equal sign or the subtract sign to zoom in and out. Or if you want to zoom to fit, you just tap 1 or 0 for 100%. The last tool on the tools panel is this export assets tool. And you can see that it shows 0 out of 0 selected, that I can't export anything. And that's because before you export anything, you have to actually select these objects and make them exportable and decide what format you want to export them in. So now that I clicked on that to make exportable, let's say we have 2 or 3 or 4 different objects. I'm just going to add another circle here, and I'll make this exportable as well. So we have 2 exportable objects now. And you can click on this export and you can see these 2 layers, and it's going to export both of them as a PNG. Now you don't have the option to name these objects that are being exported in the export panel, but if you want this file to be named something differently, you can click on it here and just double click to change the name right here. And you can name this cake, for example. If you jump back in here, you can see that that's named differently. To walk you through the Pages and Layers panel, let's open up this Pages Layers file that you can find in the exercise folder under Chapter 2. And first off, if you don't see this Layers panel, it may be hidden. So you can go in the View menu and Show Layers panel right here. And this will toggle the Layers panel on and off. Now to show you this Layers panel, I just want to hold down the Z key and I'll draw a rectangle under this login page here just to zoom in a little bit. And you can see, first of all, if you hover over different layers, you can see that those layers are shown in the canvas as well in blue. And each layer has an icon here to the left of it to indicate what this layer is for. So for example, this text layer is a group of all of these text objects here, and that's indicated by a dashed line. And then we also have frames, so the login page, home page, menu. These are all frames that group the objects inside of this device preview. Now frames can also be inside of frames. For example, if you click on this Your Art Museum frame here, we can see that this is app info that's inside of the login page frame. And one nice thing with working with Figma is, for example, if I click outside of this frame here and I go into this home frame, let's scroll over and I can click on Masters Old and New. As soon as I do that, then everything drops down and expands to show me these objects within this frame itself. Now if you want to keep things clean after you're done working with, for example, the home frame, you can click on this little arrow and it'll collapse all of the layers underneath this home frame. And so you can collapse and expand anything that's grouped, like frames. This is a component here, and groups. Now, master components are what you can use to create a design and reuse it throughout your project. And we'll talk about that more in a future video. But this behaves much like a group as well, where you'll have objects underneath this master component. Now, within any of these layers, like this app info layer, you can click and drag this down throughout the hierarchy to move this down in the layers panel. So right now this is behind the background image. And so I can move this down or move this back up where it belongs, where you can see this. You can also move layers onto different artboards or frames by clicking and holding. If you hold, then it'll expand the layers underneath this frame. And I can click and let go, and now this is inside of another layer. I'm just going to click Command Z a few times to undo this. And now another thing that you get with layers, if you right click, you have a number of different menu items to manipulate these layers. So you can send them forward and back in the layer scheme. You can group certain selections if you select multiple layers. You have the option to show and hide a layer, or lock and unlock, or you can flip them, or copy and paste certain styles. Now to show and hide or lock and unlock layers, you also have some icons here. If you hover over any layer, you can quickly click this lock icon, and now if I click anywhere within this area, I'm not able to select this Your Art Museum layer, but I can select any layers underneath this. So it's a great feature if you still want to see the objects in front of other objects, but you want to reach out to the elements behind to interact with them. You can also toggle this eye icon to hide your layers. And if you do hide this layer, you can still expand this layer. And you can see that there are some nested layers here that are also hidden, and that's indicated by this dot saying I'm adopting the same hidden property that you have applied to the parent layer. So working with layers is really great, but what happens when you have a lot of frames and a lot of layers within one page? Well, we have the Pages panel as well. This shows page 1 here, and there's only one page right now in this project. And I can show you how Pages works. If I hit the 1 key, I'm going to zoom out here to show all of these artboards. And let's say I want to organize some of these artboards in different pages. So if I want to do that, I can click on this page 1 here, and you can see that I get a little drop down to create a new page. So I'm going to create a page called Collections. And now if I go back to page 1, I can select any frame that I want or any objects that I want. And if I right click, I can move this to the page Collections. I can also just Command X here and go into the collections page and Command V for a quick cut and paste or copy and paste in between pages. Now, one really nice way that I like to use pages is I always create a page within my project called Archive Land. And I use this Archive Land page for different designs that I might want to archive but aren't necessarily a part of the current design. For example, if I hold down the Z key and zoom into this home frame here, and I'll hold down Command and just scroll down just so I can see a little bit above here too. I can click on this home frame and hold down Option, and if I hold down Option I can drag this up to create a copy. And now I can make a number of changes to this, and if I like this change and I want to commit to this, I can save this in my current design, but to keep this page clean, I can just right click here and move this to Archive Land, and I know that I have access if I want to refer to that later, but I can commit this frame to my current design. To show you how the Components panel works, let's open up this Components panel Fig project, and you can find that in the exercise files under Chapter 2. And in this project we have three simple layers. We have a rectangle, we have an add button, and a heart button. And now we can find the Components panel here right next to the Layers panel. If we click down here, we can see that there aren't any components created yet, and it's telling us to create a component, select a layer, and click the Create Component button in the toolbar. So these are simple layers right now, but I can easily click on this layer and click Create Component. I can click on this heart, Create Component, and now we have two components here. And with these components, we can simply drag and drop these on other frames to reuse these components throughout other parts of the project. And the really nice thing about this is if we ever go into the master component, we can change the color, for example, to blue, and it changes everywhere throughout our project. Now, another great way to use components is inside other components. So right here we have two master components, and we can tell that they're master components by this little icon here on the top left of their name. They have four little diamonds indicating that this is the master. But now I can click on this, and if I hold down Option, I can drag this over into this navigation bar that I'm going to create to be another master component. And so I can copy this component inside of here, or I can go into the Components panel and I can drag, for example, this heart, drag this inside of this nav bar here, and now we have these two components inside of this navigation bar. Now the last thing I'm going to do is click and drag a rectangle around all three of these objects, and I'll click one more time, Create Component, and now we have a nav bar component. So if I want to hold down Option, I can copy this, or again, I can click in this component panel and copy this onto other frames. And before I move any further, I'm just going to delete some of these extra objects here. And I'm going to hold down Option and now and copy this frame over to the right. So now we have three frames that have the same components inside of them. We very easily created these three components. And so now, within seconds, I can change the look of this nav bar by double clicking inside of here to get to this rectangle. I can decide, well, I want this nav bar to be blue now, and I actually want these to be white. So I'm going to double click inside of here, make this white, and as I'm making these changes, even as I'm selecting the color within here, you can see that this is gradually changing within all of the child components. So these are just some of the basic ways that you can create components, and they become really powerful. But you can always find these components inside of this Components panel, and if you want to use these components throughout other projects, you can very easily publish these files to a library to reuse in other projects that isn't even in this Components panel Figma project. Now, one thing you have to be careful of is because these are master components right here, if I delete this master component, it's going to be deleted in the Components panel as well. And now I don't have that same kind of power. If I double click into this component here, I can still change the color of this heart, and it changes red everywhere else, but it's not because of this component we created before, it's because it's living inside of this component that I'm editing. So that's just a basic overview of how components works, just to show you this Components panel and where you can organize your components here and reuse them throughout your project. To show you how Team Libraries works, I need to first show you how to add a new team into Figma. So down here, when we very first start up Figma in the start screen, we have this new team icon. And here you can name your team. And if you go through this process, there will be options to invite new members to the team. Because I already went through this, I'm going to click cancel. And I've enabled a paid account under the team Brainspin so I can show you this feature. Now, if you're working with the free account, you don't have access to the team libraries, so you won't be able to follow along with me, but I'll still be able to explain kind of how team libraries works and how the panels works. And if you do have a paid subscription plan, feel free to just add a team and then click new project here. And I'm just going to call this project Bootstrap Styles. And I'll click create project here. And once I have this project set up, I can import my file here. And let's import the bootstrap_styles fig file. And now we can open up this bootstrap styles fig file. And we can see a number of buttons that were designed for Bootstrap. So now that we're in a team and we have these buttons designed, let's say we want to use these across multiple files and share these designs with the team so they can use these buttons throughout their project. Well, first thing I'll do is click on this components panel here, and we can see that they're not set up as a component yet. So what we would do is click on each of these elements and just click create component. And we can see there's a button primary, there's a button secondary, and just go through here and click on the create component for each of these in the top row. So now we have these components set up, and here we can start with the primary button here. If I right click, I can publish this one component to the team library, and if I click on that, we can see that now this is in the team library section, and I can always remove this from the library. But what does that mean now that this is added in a library in the libraries panel? Well, I can click down here and I can see that we have this file called Bootstrap Styles, and if I click in here, we have that one button we can reuse throughout multiple files. Well, I'll go back here into the components panel and I'll just click this info and I'll add this to the library. Well, let's just add them all. So now we have these all added to the library, and we can see a little sync icon here saying they've been added, but they haven't been published yet. So if I go to any other file and try to access these, I'm not going to be able to find them. So I'll just click this publish, and it'll give me a view of everything that's going to be added to the library. And so I'll click publish changes, and now these are all added to the team library. So now all I have to do is click on this plus icon to create a whole new file. And as I'm designing, I can click to create a new frame here, and I'll go to desktop and create a desktop frame. And so now that somebody else on my team may have created and shared those styles, I can jump here to the team library and jump into Bootstrap Styles and say, I guess I want this primary button. I want to use this throughout my project here. So if I hold down Option, I can copy this 3 times here. And now that I have these inside my file, I can still double click on these, and let's click on the layers panel so we can see how these look here. So I still see this background, I can see the text, and I can change this text to click on me. I can resize those. And if I want to change the look of this, I can click this Go to Master Component, and it will jump into this project where the master component is. And here, I can double click inside of here to change this to green, for example. And I can go back into my project and nothing's changed yet. But if I go back into this Bootstrap Styles, you can see that it's shown here that I've changed the style, but I haven't published the change. So as soon as I click publish, or if any team members click publish, then it's going to tell me this is going to be updated in the library from blue to green. So I'll click publish change here, and we'll click on Untitled, and everything is still blue. But you notice here on the bottom right we have an alert that says component updates available. So I can click dismiss or review here, and I'll click dismiss right now. And one thing that's really nice is you're not surprised by some quick changes by team members, and you don't have to adopt those changes that they created. But if we ever wanted to adopt those changes later, we can click on this team library panel here, and let's click this back button, and we can see that there's one update available. So I'll click on that update, and it'll tell me this button primary in Bootstrap changed to green here. So I'll decide I want to update this. So I'll just click update, and now everything's changed to green. And it still has that blue stroke. So I'll go back in here and I'll double click on this again, change this blue stroke to maybe the same, maybe a light green stroke or a dark green stroke. Let's just do that. Same thing here, publish the change. Now that it's published, we can go back into our other project, and we can click review immediately this time and update all changes. So the power behind team libraries is you can have one team member that is designing all of the styles for a certain project or for multiple projects. And at the same time, you can have somebody else working on the project itself, adopting those styles, dragging them in, and applying those. And then they can decide whether to adopt changes later as the style grows. So it's a great way to reuse styles and elements, not just in your project like Master Components allows, but throughout multiple projects and throughout the entire team. To show you the design panel, I have a simple artboard here with a few elements on them. And this design panel will change depending on what you have clicked on. So here we have a basic home screen for a recipe website. And when we don't have anything selected, this design panel reflects the canvas or the background that the frames are sitting on. So here we can change the color of this background if we want it to be more dark, for example, or if we want the background to show in some exports. And we can also change the transparency and choose to enable pixel preview or pixel grid preview right here. So all of our design properties are around the background here because we don't have anything selected. So when we select this chef's hat, we can see the properties change to reflect this hat. So we can still move this around, and we can move the X and Y coordinates here, and you see the properties panel is changing. And we can also resize the width and the height, and we can lock the proportions. So if I want to change the height here to be 30, then the width is going to change to reflect that ratio. We can also quickly change the rotation by 15 degrees, and also if you hold down Command while you're hovering over these anchor points, you can rotate them with your mouse as well. Now, one really nice feature in Figma are the constraints tools. With these tools, we can constrain any objects to the left top of this artboard or frame, or we can pin it to the right or the center. So we have all of these controls to constrain our objects for responsive design. For example, this one, if I choose to scale this, I'm going to click on this desktop frame now, and I'm just going to resize this, and you can see that both of these items scale here. Now I'm going to hold down Command Z and undo that. We don't want this to scale. What we want it to do is pin to the top left here. This one can pin to the top left, and maybe these guys here can pin to the top right. So we have those set up, and now when we rescale this, you can see up the top here, that behaves how it's supposed to. So as you can see, there's very nice controls here for constraints. And then we have a layers section, and this is where we can get some overlay settings if we want something to multiply. So why it multiplied by anything is that color. If we change it to red, you can kind of see how it's transparent. I'm going to hold down Command here and zoom in so you can kind of see what that's doing. But you can play with some different overlay effects here and get a nice style that you want. I'm just going to change this back to white, and just normal is fine. So you have some nice opacity effects here. You can increase the transparency here, or just simply hide the layer if you want to. And then you have fill control. So this is where you'll change the actual color, and we saw that as I was changing this around. So you can change this to blue, and we can create a fill on top of a fill, which is really great. So if I click on this plus icon here, you can see that I have a linear fill on top of a solid fill. So that gives us this nice white on top of blue, and I can change the angle of these pretty quickly and just get a nice effect if I want one. Something like that looks good. And so multiple fill options, and within this fill color you can fill with a solid color, a linear color, radial, angular, diamond, or an actual image. So if you click on image here, it's going to ask you to choose an image, and you can find one in your file and fill that image. If I ever want to delete a fill, I can just click on the fill here and just click this subtract button, and it'll remove that. And now I'll turn this back to white. And we have stroke, and again we can create multiple stroke colors. I'll just create this as blue, and I want this to be on the outside of the icon. You can change the weight. You have some nice dash settings if you want that stroke to be dashed, if you want the dashes to be capped, things like that. Now we also have some effects settings, and I'm going to show you. If I hold down Command and just scroll down, I'll zoom out here, and you can see this background here. We actually have two effects here. So when you click on the plus icon, it adds a new effect in here. I'm going to just delete this one, and then you can choose between an inner shadow, drop shadow, layer blur, or background blur. Now this background blur is really nice because you have the ability to turn down the opacity. I'm going to turn this to 70 here so you can kind of see what's going on in the background. And you can see this layer has blurred the background. And these settings can be changed right here. So I can decide I want this to be a 30 pixel blur. And you can see it's becoming more blurred. And then just tune the opacity however you want to see that blur in the background. Maybe I'll tune this to 90. And same thing with drop shadow. Just click this icon to see the blur settings. And if you want a Y coordinate here, if you want to drop this shadow down 2 pixels, that'll happen here. And you can change the opacity here, and also some overlay effects for that shadow itself. So very powerful controls just for basic shapes like these icons or these rectangles. You can also see this rectangle shape. I've actually removed the fill. So if it starts out with the fill, you can just click over here and click the subtract icon, and it'll remove that fill. And now I only have a stroke. And with this stroke, I've actually created a dashed line here, so you can see that here. There's a 2 pixel dash and a 2 pixel gap. And if I click away, you can kind of see that dash and gap here. So with this chef's icon, with this rectangle, and these icons, we get the same kind of design panel here that's meant for vector shapes. But now when I click on this background here, and we can see, although this looks like an image, it's actually a rectangle with an image fill applied. So we have this image fill here, and then we have a black 20% opacity layer fill on top of that. And then we have a linear fill just for the top, just to give a little black transition down so this text is easier to read here. So this is all one object, and it has 3 different layers. It makes it very nice to quickly go in and change some of these. So let's say maybe I only want a 5% opacity here. We can change that very easily. And if I want to edit this image at all, I can click on this little thumbnail. And I have some nice exposure controls. If I want to change the exposure, some contrast, change that here. And we can change the temperature if we want it to be warmer or colder. We can do that very easily. And then we have other controls like tint, highlights, and shadows. Now one thing I haven't shown you yet are the alignments and the distribution tools. So if I click on this icon here, and let's just mess this up a little bit, just drag these around here. If I want these to be aligned, I can hold down Shift and just select the multiple items here. And I have some alignment controls up here to align things to the top, align them to the bottom. Now these are the same height, so top and bottom are both aligned, or align center. And then we also have distribute horizontal spacing, which will make sure that this has the same spacing between each icon. So if I wanted, I can click on these icons, just align them to this text here, and do that to start out with, and then hold down Shift and select these different objects, and we'll distribute these evenly, we'll align them evenly, and now we can move this text to be aligned with this object itself. So very nice to just have a clean design here. And now with different text layers, you can see we have some of the similar properties like constraints. We can resize here very easily. But now we have a text section. And this is where you're going to change your font styles, your weights, and the sizes. And if it's multiple lines of text like we see here down below, we can change things like the line spacing. I'm going to change this to 120%, and you can see how that spacing increases here. Also the spacing between characters, so if we want to increase that by 15%, we can do that. And maybe I'll just do 5% because that was a bit dramatic. And also paragraph spacing, so if we want to change this to 20, you can see only the paragraph was spaced. And now we can align this text to the top of the bounding box, the center of the bounding box, or the bottom of the bounding box. So now if we change this bounding box to be taller, we can change where that lives inside of this box. We also have paragraph indentation and some alignment tools that you find in some common text editors. But there are some hidden effects here as well. So if we drag this down here and we click on this advanced menu, we have things like auto resize the width, and you can see what that did here. It made it as wide as the text allows. I'm going to hit undo. And we have some other objects like transform this to all uppercase, all lowercase, or just correct capitalization. And then we have some underline or strike through effects here. Makes it very handy. And then we have some more advanced font features like fractions, all small caps, superscript or subscript. And then we can change the way fonts are aligned by proportional alignment, tabular, proportional old style, or tabular old style. So a lot of great advanced features for fonts, as well as the normal stroke effects, layers, and constraints sections that you get with other objects. Now there's one more section we haven't talked about here, and that's the export section. And this is with every object that you select, you have the ability to export that object. So we have 3 icons here, and let's say we want to export this out as we develop for the iPhone. Well, we can click on this plus export, and we can see that this is going to export as a one-time PNG. And we can change this to JPEG or SVG, but if we only want PNG, we can click plus a few times to even export this out as 2 times resolution, 3 times resolution, and get multiple file sizes with just one export of this spoon. Same thing with this fork, just click this 1, 2, 3, and you have 3 different sizes that are going to be exported, and this knife, 1, 2, 3. So with this we can quickly click preview and see how this is going to look in the preview, and then export this file into any folder that you want. Now because I set these to be exportable, if I ever change them and then export, it'll actually export the changes. And I can click on this tool here to export in bulk all of the items I've already set previously to be exportable. They'll all be here, so I can do a one-time export of everything in my project. The prototype panel is where you're going to go to connect all of your artboards for an interactive prototype. And that lives right next to this design tab here. So I'm going to click on this prototype tab, and it's first going to ask, what do you want the background to be when you're in prototype mode? And to jump into prototype mode, you click on this present icon, and it opens up a new tab, and this tab will show you what this prototype is going to look like. And I can jump into this tab here to link up this prototype, and I can toggle between these 2 tabs to see my prototype or my design. So it's very simple to link up a prototype. We can see if I scroll here to the left a little bit and I click on this login page here, there's a circle here that's new to this bounding box. And I can click and drag on this circle to present a wire that I can bring to any other artboard and link up. Now instead of doing that, I can also just click on the login button itself, and I'll double click inside of here, and we can see the same circle. So this login button, I want to go to the home page, and so just watch how quickly I can link up this prototype here. Here's the hamburger menu. I'm going to double click into there, and that'll open up this page. And if I zoom in a little bit, I can quickly link up these menu items. So I can double click into exhibitions and events, if I want to link up the shopping, the collections, and I think we have tickets. Let's plan your visit. And one more is the membership. So become a member. So now those are all linked up. And if I double click inside of here, we can link all of these back into this menu icon. And now I can choose to have this area go back to this artboard here. Or let me change this. I'm going to change it to go back to this artboard. So we should have everything linked up, and we can see here there's this little home icon saying this is where your prototype is going to first land. So I can click on this and I can bring this any other place that I want. And that's all this prototype panel does for you, is it just enables you to have quick access to wire these artboards up. Then you can click on this play icon, which is right here. It'll tab back over here, and then you can interact with your prototype, opening the menu item, go into exhibitions, go into your collections, and just jump through your prototype very easily using the tools in the prototype panel. If you still have the previous file open from the last video, we can continue along. And if not, just open up the prototype panel file in the Chapter 2 exercise files folder. Now we're using the same file just to illustrate the coding panel and what happens in here. So because we don't have anything selected, we have the background, and it's telling us the hex value here for the background of this canvas. And so you can see very quickly, if you were to be programming in CSS, you can grab some quick code to place into your design files. And same with iOS, you have this RGBA background color, or Android. So you can quickly change that, or if you want to click on this code, this gives you the CSS properties. So now you have background colon and then the color, and you can quickly copy that and paste that into your development project. So that's simple enough for the background. But now if we click on some of these other elements here, I'm going to hold down Z and just zoom into this login page. And let's double click on this login button here. So we can see very quickly we have the width, height, and then left and top padding here. So very easily we can click and select this, paste this into our CSS files. Same thing with iOS or Android. And we can get some table views here or the code view. And this really can happen with almost any object here. We have this pin drop. I'm going to do the same thing. And because this is SVG, it kind of gives you this view where you can copy and paste this. And with images, again, you have the position, the height, left, right, and it'll give you the file name of that image. So if you're designing anything in Figma to then code later, or if you want to give your design files to your developers, make them aware of this code panel, because it'll likely save them a lot of time trying to guess certain colors or different font styles by just jumping in here, grabbing these, and applying them to their code. Now I do get a lot of questions about Figma being able to convert your whole design into code. And although it doesn't do that as far as the entire design being placed into code and structure it, this is still really nice for your developers to take these little snippets of code or information and code and structure the code themselves.